Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest operation from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Good to have you with us on this, depending on where you're joining us from around the world, Sunday morning, Saturday night, however you want to look at it. Just a little bit past midnight here on the East Coast as we're seeing SpaceX begin to fuel its Falcon 9 rocket ahead of a static fire test. Again, we'll say it now, say it often throughout the course of this broadcast. This is not a launch, a static fire test of the Falcon 9 rocket here at Launch Complex 39A. An important part of the process of getting ready for any crew launch, as is the case with this particular vehicle. SpaceX is getting ready to launch for four first-time flyers on a free-flying mission. Try saying that 3 times fast. This mission dubbed Fram 2, not docking with the International Space Station, but for the first time going to be flying a crewed polar orbit mission, lifting off from this pad, and when it does launch, flying due south into that polar orbit over southern Florida. It's an interesting mission, again, flying an orbit that has not been flown before, not only by SpaceX, but not by any other human space flight previously. We'll be talking more about the mission tonight, as well as over the course of the next couple of days, as we're looking towards a first launch opportunity on Monday, March 31st. SpaceX is looking to launch the Fram 2 mission at 9:46 p.m. Eastern. It's the first of 4 opportunities over the course of a roughly 4-hour window, 4.5 hours. You got chances at 9:46 p.m. Eastern, 11:20 p.m. Eastern, 12:53 a.m., and then at 2:26 going into Tuesday morning. For now, those we're getting ready to see this brief ignition of the Falcon 9 integrated rocket. Want to welcome in the a little more than 700 of you who are with us in the overnight hours. Appreciate you staying up late with us here on a Saturday night. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button, sharing the stream, allows more folks to find their way into this live static fire coverage. We are joined this evening, of course, by our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who's running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most of the team has this operation off, seeing as how the rocket's not going anywhere. But now's a great time to follow our launch photography squad. You could find them at their respective handles here on X. Adam is at Burn NYC, out with us tonight, making sure all the cameras are in focus, pointing the right direction, framed up nicely. You can also find Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr. Newest member of the team, John Pisani. Still with the folks as well over at Cosmic Perspective, but part of the team here doing stuff with us on the East Coast. You can find him at John Pisani Photo. While you're on X, be sure to follow us at Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. And if you're not on that social media, you can also find us on Facebook, Threads, and Blue Sky. Want to thank our moderators in the live chat for hanging out with us tonight, helping to keep the live chat kosher. Thanks to Rick Donner, to Astro Joe, Jeff Hansen. Saw Clisty Lee here earlier. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us tonight. You can help out the mods just by following the rules of the chat. Refrain from delving into overt politics. There are plenty of other political channels on YouTube. This is not one of them. We also ask that you refrain from using all caps, converse in English so that our moderators can respond appropriately, and step in when needed. And remember to be respectful of one another. We're also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube who make these live static fire and otherwise launch opportunities possible. So thanks to folks like Ryan Snyder, M. Teresa, Butterfly, Mike, Joni Mahoney, and many others. Scod267, good evening to you all. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch and static fire moments here at the Cape in 4K. Brian Big B Clark in the live chat asks a question that comes up from time to time, especially when we get into live streams like tonight, asking why do they do a static fire test? And I'll explain that question out. Why sometimes and not other times? Well, of course, the most important thing that SpaceX could possibly launch is not any type of observatory or particular satellite, but of course, human beings. And so part of going through a static fire test is to ensure that all of the systems, both connected to the Falcon 9 rocket, the Dragon spacecraft up top, as well as all the ground systems, are working as expected, not just in general, but with this particular vehicle that's going to be used to launch those humans into orbit. And so if there are any kinks, it's always most ideal to get those shaken out and checked before you have humans on board. That's why prior to this static fire test, they do what's called a dry dress rehearsal. Essentially, the crew on board the Dragon spacecraft, as well as all of the launch support teams, go through the motions of getting the astronauts suited up, going through all the steps of launch day, including the ingress into the pad, making sure they've got their seatbelts fastened and secure, and basically go down to the moment of T0, but with a Falcon 9 rocket that does not have any propellant on board. And then once that's done and everyone knows what's going to be happening and expected on launch day, then they clear the pad and then begin tanking the rocket to go through this final test. And then if anything does come up, then they have time to address that before the launch itself. We're just about 20 minutes, 20 seconds away from the static fire test. And there you see the big vent going. Because this is a static fire test, SpaceX doesn't publish a lot of information about the timing of it ahead of time. So we're adjusting our clock to reflect the more accurate T0 here. So we're now just about 20 minutes away from the roughly 10 to 12 second ignition of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the booster. Time now T minus 15 minutes, about 7 seconds. We're a little more than halfway through the fueling process now on the Falcon 9 rocket. But with the time remaining, let's go ahead and just give you an overview of what we're expecting with the remaining time that we have before the ignition of the Falcon 9 rocket and its 9 Merlin engines. We'll step lively through the count that we've already gone through. About T minus 45 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director made the call on the start of prop load. Comes a little bit earlier on a Dragon mission. That's because the crew access arm needs to retract at T minus 42 minutes is when that process wraps up. Then the launch escape system is armed, so if there were to be an issue with the Falcon 9 rocket, then the Dragon spacecraft at the top can use its Super Draco thrusters to jettison it away from the vehicle. T minus 35 minutes is when prop load began with the loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stage, and liquid oxygen began flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T minus 30 minutes is when cryogenic helium load began on the first stage. Same was true on the second, a few minutes thereafter. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during the flight. T minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP-1 loading wrapped up. T minus 20 minutes 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process got underway. That's when SpaceX was thermally conditioning the Lions ahead of second stage LOX load beginning, which started at the 16-minute mark. We saw that visually represented by the so-called big vent. Coming up next, there's no comm checks, of course, since the astronauts are not on board. So we'll go ahead to the engine chill. That's when SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. T minus 6 minutes is when the first stage kerosene tank is full. T minus 5 minutes, the Dragon spacecraft transitions to its internal power systems. T minus 4.5 minutes is when the strong back retract sequence gets underway. That's when the clamp arms just beneath the Dragon trunk open up. Then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stays in that position through the static fire. T minus 3 minutes is when the first stage liquid oxygen tank will be full. Same will be true at about T minus 2 minutes, at which point the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give the go-ahead for the static fire to commence. T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And the static fire, of course, will begin when our clock hits just about T minus 0. Again, because this is a static fire test, there's a little bit less public information that goes out about this. So if the T0 is off by a couple of seconds from what you see with our countdown clock, this is more of an approximation, if you will. Just about 9.5 minutes to go before the static fire test gets underway. As we're preparing for this engine fire, the Falcon 9, I want to thank a few folks in the live chat for their support this evening. Our thanks to channel member and moderator Astro Joe for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Joe. And to our newest channel member, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. I'm sure to thank Astro Joe in the live chat if you haven't already. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Also want to thank Captain Casey for a very generous $25 super chat. Really appreciate that, Captain. Who says probably won't see much, but hope to see glow here along the ICW near the Brevard Indian River County borderline. With a little less than 8 minutes to go before the planned static fire test. With a little, just a hair more than 7 minutes now before the planned static fire test, let's go ahead and talk about the crew who are no longer aboard the Dragon spacecraft, but were a little bit earlier on Saturday evening. Taking a look at the four soon-to-be astronauts who are flying the Fram 2 mission. From left to right, you have Rabea Rogge from Germany. She is the mission pilot on the Fram 2 mission. To her left, our right, that is Eric Phillips from Australia, serving as the mission specialist and medical officer. To his left, you have Jannicke Mikkelsen from Norway. And then finally, Jannicke is the vehicle commander. And finally, we have Chun Wang, who is the mission commander from Malta, who is the person responsible for pulling together the Fram 2 mission. An entrepreneur in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin mining, he started the company F2 Pool back in 2013. Here's a photo of the four of them in their SpaceX flight suits as they were undergoing training in Hawthorne, California. The crew has been preparing for about 8 months or so to embark on this roughly 3.5 to 5 day mission. It's going to be lifting off from here on Florida's Space Coast, but splashing down off the coast of California. In fact, this will be the first time since SpaceX began flying crew that a Dragon spacecraft, a Dragon 2 spacecraft to be specific, will be splashing down off the coast of California. The Dragon that's supporting the Crew 10 mission on the International Space Station, once it undocks later this year, it'll also splash down off the coast of California. Little less than 5 minutes to go. This is the spacecraft that is going to be flying these astronauts on their mission called Resilience. This will be the fourth time that it has flown after supporting the Crew 1 mission to the International Space Station, as well as the other free-flying missions that we've seen so far, Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn. Here's the mission patch for the Fram 2 mission. Fram, for those unfamiliar, is the name of a ship that was built in the late 1800s and used for polar expeditions around the 1890s through the 1910s. Fram 2 will actually be carrying aboard part of that vessel that was signed by one of its captains back in 1910. That'll be flying as a part of the Fram 2 mission in honor of its namesake. Going to pause here for a moment, take a look back at the Falcon 9 rocket. The clamp arms, a little bit hard to tell given all the vapor, but clamp arms should be opened up now. You can see just a little bit of movement as the strong back begins to recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. And it'll stay in that position through the static fire test. Just about 3 minutes before the planned static fire, coming up on the point at which the first stage booster is fully loaded with its liquid oxygen. Then it'll be true on the second stage here at about the T-minus 2 minute mark. The additional venting you're seeing here are the ground gas closeouts as SpaceX is purging the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines there on the strong back. Falcon 9 now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Coming up on the last minute before ignition of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the booster. T-minus 45 seconds, the point at which the SpaceX launch director would be making the call to go ahead with the static fire here. Not getting mission audio, though, because this is a static fire test and SpaceX doesn't publicize this part. Just about 20 seconds out. Roughly 15 seconds. Here we go in about 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, T-tap ignition, and engine start. And it appears that we've had the conclusion of the static fire test. And with the conclusion of this static fire test now, SpaceX will go back and review the data, make sure it all appeared as they were expecting. And assuming that this was in good order and the weather cooperates not only here in Florida, but also off the coast of California, then they will proceed into a launch attempt on Monday, March 31st. Once again, they have 4 opportunities for the launch of the Fram 2 mission. The first coming up at 9:46 p.m. Eastern. That is 01:46 UTC for those around the world. Again, though, the weather does have to align both where they lift off and where they plan to splash down. So, as SpaceX noted in a Spaces audio event discussing the mission on Friday, they do have backup opportunities certainly on Tuesday, April 1st, and I believe at least 1, if not 2 more after that. So, if you recall with the Polaris Dawn mission, that was the reason why that flight had to scrub and push off to the right a number of times, is because they needed the weather to align and things just weren't cooperating for both liftoff and splashdown. So, given that they are not launching to the International Space Station, that's something that they have to be as sure as possible about before they go ahead and launch these 4 into a polar orbit. For now, though, we're going to go ahead and wind down our live coverage of this static fire test. We're also tracking the launch, potentially, of another Falcon 9 rocket from here on the East Coast, the Starlink 6-80 mission, set to lift off from Launch Complex, or Space Launch Complex, I should say, 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Weather permitting, and the weather doesn't seem like it will be very permitting on Sunday. Just a 20% chance of favorable weather with a launch opportunity tomorrow. The 45th Weather Squadron are tracking a number of potential issues with the launch attempt for the Starlink flight tomorrow, including violations conceivably of the cumulus cloud rule, the anvil cloud rules, and the surface electric fields rule. Winds trending between 22 to 27 miles per hour tomorrow, and the booster recovery weather is highlighted as a moderate risk on the scale of low to moderate to high. So don't be overly surprised if you hear or see on our launch schedule at spaceflightnow.com that the Starlink 6-80 mission has punted from Sunday and is targeting Monday, roughly around the same time. If they are able to launch tomorrow, the window opens at 3:20 p.m. Eastern. If it pushes to Monday, though, that would be at 2:57 p.m. Eastern for that Starlink mission. Weather improves to 65% favorable as opposed to 20% favorable. Booster recovery weather improves a little bit. Winds died down, but still quite a bit of instability that may be hanging around per meteorologist forecast. So be sure to keep up with those updates on, again, spaceflightnow.com. Just click on the launch schedule tab, and that way you'll be informed of any further changes that may be coming down the pike for that mission, as well as any additional updates from Fram 2. We'll have more on the Fram 2 mission, of course, on launch day itself, so look for our live coverage then, as well as to learn a little bit more about the crew in the days to come. We'll have a little bit more for you to peruse on our website as well. If you'd like to check out the mission overview, we have an article up for you right now. You can find that on the main page of the website so that you can get caught up to speed with some of the items that the crew will be undertaking, including 22 science experiments that they hope to conduct while on board. Closing things out, I want to thank our moderators in the live chat who've been helping us out today. Thanks to Rick Donner, to Astro Joe, to Jeff Hansen as well. Callisti Lee, appreciate all of you. Thanks to our photographer, Adam Bernstein, making sure all the cameras were as they should be this evening at the press site. Once again, you can follow him at aburnnyc on X if you're not already. Also want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, want to thank you for wherever you've been watching from. We look forward to welcoming you back in with us whenever SpaceX is ready to launch either the Starlink mission or Fram 2. Also keeping our eyes peeled for the next West Coast Starlink launch, which right now is looking to lift off on April 1st. And that's no fooling. And with that, for all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.